minute. We'll give people a minute more or so to get started, and then we will start. Well, I want to honor everyone who showed up early, and we'll start on time. The video will be made available to everyone who registered, so we can get started. Solange, is that all right with you?
Yeah, it's fine.
Great. Okay, let me do a quick setup.
Are you recording?
Yeah, we are. You should. Does it not say we're recording? Yeah, I see recording.
Okay.
So we'll be able to send it to everyone. That's one of the housekeeping points. Everyone who's here will get access to the video and the slides as well. Solange, you want to put up the other slide? Solange wants to finish this in 30 to 40 minutes max, so we don't take too much of your time. And I pointed out that unless you all ask a lot of questions, which is a double-edged sword. I know Solange tends to cover the subject pretty well, but you might still ask a lot of questions. We'll see how it goes towards the end. If you're going to have questions, please enter them in the Q&A tab on the bottom. If you look on your screen, you should see a Q&A tab on the bottom. And I will be monitoring that throughout the presentation while Solange presents. I just want to say this is a 5-part series. This is number 4, which is about community. Solange will explain more about that as we go. And number 5, which will probably be early next month, we haven't picked an actual date yet, will be focused on strategic partners as stakeholders. Real quickly, if anyone doesn't know who we are, HC Moneyball is a first-of-its-kind analytics solution where we show the relationship between all the money that's spent on any item related to your people, your human capital, and we relate that, show it for you, to financial outcomes. And most of our clients have asked us over time to find some way to give them the benefits of using our platform without them having to run the SaaS platform. So we created this series of reports. And these reports are actually audit reports. We don't do an audit in the big accounting firm sense, but we do, with your cooperation, we get information and we give you back a snapshot of where you are, plus comparisons as a benchmark to other companies in your industry. So we will talk about that. I'll tell you how to get in touch with us towards the end. Once again, put your questions in the Q&A tab on the bottom, please. And Solange, I think I have said all I can. The rest is up to you.
Cool. So thank you for everybody for joining us today. I'm looking at who's in the room, and I see a lot of people that I know. So thank you for your support. For those of you that don't know my background or haven't been a student of mine or haven't interacted with me or seen a previous presentation, this is a little background on who I am and what I'm passionate about. So you can see here a lot of activity. The most recent is that I joined the ISO organization. I'm a member of the technical committee 260. I don't know what 260 stands for. And I am specifically working on the revamping and redefinition of the ISO 3414 standard, which is around human capital governance and reporting. And we just had a meeting this morning that lasted 3 hours, and we've got another 3-hour meeting tomorrow morning. And what was brought to our attention was the ISO 3414 standard was released in 2018. That's 5 years ago. And when the 3414 standard was released, that it was the only standard that was in the world around human capital governance and reporting. And since then, just in the short 5 years, so many governance monitoring agencies have articulated what they want to see in terms of human capital governance, that it makes our first of its kind, groundbreaking work just a mere 5 years ago seem extremely obsolete. So this area is evolving all the time. It's evolving really, really quickly. So keep your eyes focused on or open for information around governance, reporting standards, required disclosures. That's the next big frontier in the human capital space. I would be remiss, my publicist and my literary agent would be mad if I didn't take the opportunity to invite you to purchase the book that 𝙤𝙧𝙤𝙀 and I so lovingly wrote. There's a QR code there. If you click on the QR code, it'll take you to our website. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out. So when you're on the website, you can sign up for that monthly newsletter. And we have tips and approaches for measuring different types of human capital programs that we share every month, as well as things that are going on in the industry, right? The notable events, notable developments that might be of interest to you. And I'm actually going to be talking about one today, which hopefully you'll find interesting. Joseph already recapped a little bit about what session 4 is about, which is today's session about community, and session 5 about strategic partners. But this 5-part series was really to examine different stakeholders and their relationship to DE&I. So you can see we've already done 3 and the dates. We've looked at investors, we've looked at employees, we've looked at customers. And if you would like to have access to those recordings and the presentation materials, just reach out either to me or to Joseph, and we'll make sure that you have access to them. The last stakeholder are strategic partners. I put them last because there really isn't a lot of information about strategic partners, and that's changing. So yesterday morning, we were on a call with the corporate secretary and the CDO of American Express, and they have a very robust approach to screening their strategic partners to make sure that their policies and programs around ESG and specifically DE&I are aligned with the American Express philosophy. And so we're seeing more and more trading partners wanting to align themselves to a specific approach and philosophy related to, as I said, ESG and more specifically DE&I. So we'll be covering that next time. So today's agenda, which is focused on community as the stakeholder, will basically define what is community and what makes up community, because it's kind of hard to define, and what selected DE&I advocates have proposed in terms of an approach or have used as a way to screen their investment portfolio or their support, their brand support. And we'll be talking about As You Sow, Just Capital. I'll talk a little bit about ISO 3415, which is the diversity and inclusion standard, and how the Dow 30 is disclosing information consistent with the 3415 standard. And then we'll spend a little bit of time unpacking what it means to have community benefit or to contribute to your community based on DE&I. So again, this is a little bit of an amorphous topic. It's the first topic where I'm not going to be giving you a formula or a calculator to try to quantify the impact of DE&I on some measurable outcome. This is a lot more philosophical than reducing attrition or talent acquisition. So these last two stakeholders are really external stakeholders. So we have to think about them a little differently. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So how do we define community? Community is really a collective or group of individuals or constituents that share something in common and have the same desired outcome. So we can create community on lots of different ways. In our definition, we really care about people who are focused on DE&I. So community, in the way that we've defined it, is anyone who has a vested interest in the topic of DE&I. And again, it's broadly defined, so it could be any stakeholder. And what we're interested in is how do we show up for the communities that we define? So we've already thought about investors as a community. We've thought about employees as a community. We thought about customers as a community. And in this sense, community for me means the geography or the economic conditions or the economics of where your organization operates. So if you are a single location organization, you want to have an impact on that community. If you're a multiple location or even a global organization, you want to be sensitive to your operating footprint in terms of how it impacts that community. The most relevant community beyond investors, communities, employees, and strategic partners are governance monitors, people who are actually placing human rights and global impact ahead of any other stakeholder. So governance monitors like the UN, the International Standards Organization, the World Economic Forum, GRI, anyone who really has an interest in, and what we focused on this morning is the human rights footprint, whether or not our organizations are operating in a way that support individual human rights. When you think about DE&I, it has a big implication here in the United States. When you go outside of the United States, DE&I is interpreted a little bit differently. And, you know, I'm looking at who's in the room, and we have a lot of global representation, either in terms of where people are calling in from or their origin or their culture. And it would be interesting to hear from you how your country, your region defines diversity. So we spend a lot of time thinking about it here in the States, but when you go to other countries like Asia or like India, there is diversity there, but it isn't the same level of politicization that we see happening here in the United States. So that's one lens to think about it through. And there are other collective organizations like the Human Capital Management Coalition, the ICCR, the Interfaith Coalition for Corporate Responsibility, iShares, Impact Shares, and Intentional Endowment Networks are actually investors that have a particular interest in DE&I. So you have to define who your community is before you can actually understand community impact. I also wanted to share with you the research that we did at the conference board. And for many of you who know me and know the work that I do, this 2022 review is the second of its kind. We did this review in 2020. And just for simplicity's sake, I didn't show you the 2020 version. But if you would like to see the report from 2020, just let me know. I'll get it to you. I also give you a hot link at the bottom of the slide to get to that report where we talk about creating long-term value through human capital management and disclosures. What we found just between 2020 and 2022 are a lot of improvements, I guess, if you want to think about it that way, in how these governance monitoring agencies are requiring disclosures about human capital performance. And you can see that I highlighted diversity. Diversity went up from 88% to 100%, which means that every one of these governance monitoring agencies is now requiring organizations to disclose information about DE&I. And then you can see I've circled the red topics or the red areas where the numbers increased. The other thing that's interesting to note is that there's been a shift from just qualitative information, which is discussing your policy or your approach or your philosophy, to both qual and quant information, so that it's not just a policy statement, there's actual accountability in your performance. I mentioned before the 3415 standard from ISO, which is the diversity and inclusion standard, and their main focus is on performance improvement. So this is a standard that if you decide to get certified, you need to recertify every year, which is also unusual for the ISO standard organization. But every year they want to see whether or not your organization has demonstrated improvement in that metric. And they're pretty serious about it. They're pretty darn serious about it. What's also interesting that's driving this 100% number on diversity disclosures are two events that are happening, one in the United States around required disclosures and the other in Europe around required disclosures. In the US, we are waiting with bated breath for the SEC to disclose their human capital disclosure requirements beyond any material disclosures that are required. These are going to be required regardless of whether or not you think human capital is material to your organization's financial outcomes. And we believe that the diversity disclosure is going to include a lot of the same information that a lot of companies are disclosing in their ESG reporting, which is really around the diversity of their workforce. We also believe that there may be something either in the SEC disclosure requirement or from one of these monitoring agencies that actually talks about whether or not your organization is mirroring or reflecting the demographics of the local labor supply. So what investors and what these governance monitoring agencies want to see is that you do not have any biases in the way that you are hiring from your local labor supply. So let me make this real for you. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for Atlanta, Georgia, the local labor supply of people 16 years and older is about 70% African American. If you have operations or that's your only location for your business is in Atlanta, Georgia, and you are not near 70% African American, then one would conclude that you might have some biases in your hiring because you are not representing the labor supply in your community. You are biased in the way that you're hiring people. And that's what the investors want to see, especially iShares, ICCR, and other impact-based investor groups. So that's one of the things that I think is going to be coming in the future in terms of a disclosure requirement. And if you are not already understanding whether or not your employee demographics mirror the local labor community, you need to find out pretty soon, because you want to understand this in advance of the required disclosures so that you are in a better position to provide a compelling narrative about your current and your future aspiration around your demographic makeup. So I mentioned the SEC and I mentioned Europe. In Europe, it's the EFRAG organization, the European Financial Accountability Standards Group. And under them, they are administering something called ESRS, the European Standards for Reporting, European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the ESRS. And S1 is Own Workforce, which was supposed to go into effect June 30th. And they've moved out the reporting standards, the reporting requirements to later on this year. And you will be required to disclose this information if you are a publicly traded organization on the European exchange. So you can be domiciled anywhere, but if you trade on the European exchange, you will be required to comply with the ESRS standard disclosure requirements. So it's coming, and we feel that anything that public companies are required to disclose eventually trickle down to large private organizations as well. So it's coming. As one of my friends from EY would say, 𝙦𝙤𝙧𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, the genie is out of the bottle and there's no way it's going back. Okay, so something's in your future in terms of disclosing DE&I performance. And I thought it would be interesting to look at a couple of more active organizations in the space related to community. The first one is As You Sow, which is a proponent for social justice. I gave you the link to their website, so when you get the slides, you can go and look at them. But what they really care about is racial justice, workplace equity, and wage justice. So those are the three areas that they are interested in as it impacts the community. So that's something. Just Capital, and if you're not familiar with them, they are a research organization. They also partner closely with the conference board, so I know them from there, as well as the research that they do outside of the conference board, because they are a strong research organization. And what they saw was that companies that disclose their EEO-1 reports, the EEO-1 filings, actually have higher returns. So there's something in being transparent about your DE&I. And I thought that that was really interesting. So you could take a look at that. And you can see the trend. And we are doing a lot of research in this area as well, where we're actually looking at 2 EEO-1 reports in subsequent years. And what we're finding is that there is a relationship between how diverse an organization is, how it is correlated, positively correlated to HCROI performance, which is human capital return on investment, and how that is strongly correlated to profitability performance. So something for you to think about in terms of, again, community impact. I was recently introduced to an organization called OWL ESG. This is an organization that's basically scraping public domain information related to ESG and analyzing that data. And I thought that it was really interesting that they have a line item or an area that goes into their rating algorithm that's all about diversity and rights. So you can see what they're looking at here: board, gender, managerial, right, et cetera, diversity policy, improvement policies. So you can see how granular this organization is in terms of scraping information. And again, the point of this is ESG impact, right? How it impacts all stakeholders, including the community. Lastly, from an external perspective, I wanted to share with you what the ISO 34115 standard is around diversity and inclusion. And this standard reads, developing an inclusive workplace requires an ongoing commitment to diversity and inclusion to address inequalities in organizational systems, policies, processes, and practice, as well as people's conscious and unconscious biases and behaviors. So that's pretty lofty. And working with the ISO organization and the certifiers for the 3414 standard here in the United States, we decided to do a review of the Dow 30 organizations. And we looked at many of the categories that are embedded in the 3415 standard to see how these Dow 30 companies are actually meeting the disclosure requirements for the standard. And you can see along these DE&I aspects, initiatives, accountability, framework, culture, pay equity, HR programs, and external stakeholders, that the Dow 30 are doing a pretty good job on disclosing voluntarily information about these aspects without actually being certified by the ISO organization. So if you are not disclosing information, maybe this is a good reason to start disclosing. There's a lot of research out there that shows that companies that do well are doing well because they do good. So doing good leads to better performance. So now what I wanted to do is really talk about how we can measure at the community level how DE&I initiatives may contribute positively. So we think that DE&I enhances communities through increased representation. Having more diversity in your workforce actually leads to a more inclusive and sensitive environment and culture. There's plenty of research that shows the more diversity there is in an organization, the better the decision making, because we are now incorporating different points of view. And we are also representing within our organization the demographics of our customers and consumers. You might think about measuring analyzing your EEO-1 reports over time, so that you can get a selfie of your own progress. And as I said before, compare your diversity profile to your competitors, as well as understand whether or not your diversity mirrors the local labor supply. So increased representation. Equal opportunity. When you focus on diversity, you are actually taking out of your blind spot bias. So you are reducing bias when you focus on diversity, and it can contribute to a more equitable society when you are actually employing more diverse people in your organization. Some of the things that you might want to use to measure that is to look at your recruiting and screening processes, especially if you're using AI or any type of an applicant tracking, an applicant screening system. And I want to bring to your attention that New York City is the first city in the nation that requires bias audits of any organization using AI in their hiring protocols. And the EEOC has taken action to prevent discrimination against job seekers with the release of a technical assistant document. I've given you hot links to these resources. I was just at the NYU 75th Labor and Employment Law Symposium, and we heard from EEO commissioners. We heard from the Federal Trade Commission on banning NDAs. The world around labor and employment is really changing, and it's changing quickly, and it's changing at the federal level. So something for you to think about. DE&I enhances communities because more diversity actually creates higher levels of creativity and innovation. I gave you an article that references this, that cognitive dissonance combined with technical advances leads to entrepreneurial breakthroughs, and entrepreneurial breakthroughs support the community. There's a lot of economic development that occurs when we have entrepreneurial advancement, when we have new businesses, and so that's really important. And the types of measures that you might think about using are the number and types of innovative solutions that your organization creates or generates. You might want to think about measuring the speed to problem solving or adaptability. And remember that anything that you can define, you can measure. So, think about how critical creativity and innovation is to your organization and how you might measure that within your own culture and climate. Enhance community relations. So when companies prioritize diversity and inclusion, it actually enhances their relationship with a broader community. It builds your brand, it improves your reputation. When you have a stronger brand and a stronger reputation, you get more customers. Your employees want to work with you and for you. And of course, your stakeholders, all stakeholders benefit when your brand improves. And again, you might want to measure things like diversity, financial performance, your net promoter score, your employer brand through Glassdoor or the MIT site. And even you might think of collecting information to understand your employer net promoter score internally. And lastly, and I think this is the most important, is economic impact on the greater community. So the fundamental premise is that 55% of the American workforce is considered to be a low and moderate income earner. And that's just a fact. And you can get that information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or any economic think tank that you favor. And research has shown that in low and moderate income earner communities, as the poverty level increases, crime rates go up and personal and business bankruptcy go up. And the community, in terms of economic impact, is suppressed. And when you hire diverse workers, you are actually giving them the leg up. You are not only helping people move to the middle of that low and moderate income earner or even to the high end of that, but you're actually creating economic development by creating more income in those communities. Crime rates go down, personal and business bankruptcies go down, and there's economic empowerment. So, thinking broadly, you may make a difference to a community by hiring a diverse candidate. Lastly, it does no one any good if you're doing great things and you're not talking about it. So communicate. And here are some recommendations. Be transparent, develop clear messages, use storytelling. Everybody loves stories, right? So you listen to the news, and as soon as you hear a human impact or a human interest story, all of a sudden you stop. So, and if you look at the ESG reports, especially the DE&I reports that are coming out of the, Fortune 1000 companies, they're always highlighting somebody in their organization to represent a story. So, use storytelling techniques to humanize the DE&I efforts and showcase real life examples. Use multiple communication channels. Every organization now has Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Insta, right? the more channels you use, the more likely you are to connect to somebody that you want to reach. Collaborate with partners. The next webinar on strategic partners is going to focus on this. Highlight collaborations and partnerships with external organizations that support community groups. The other thing that was discussed in the American Express conversation we had yesterday morning was in 2022, American Express committed $1 billion to DE&I efforts, both within the organization and external to the organization. In 2023, that commitment went up to $4 billion. They upped it by $3 billion. Now, American Express is a pretty, substantive organization where I'm sure, $4 billion is not going to put a nick in their bottom line performance, but it does demonstrate their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, both within the organization and to the communities in which they serve. And lastly, commit to continuous improvement. As I said before, that's the #1 priority for the ISO organization, is to see that you're paying attention and you're making progress. And our research shows that as diversity goes up, HCROI goes up, profitability goes up. The last thing I want to talk to you about before we open it for Q&A is that DE&I is not without controversy, and ESG is really becoming politicized. And as DE&I practitioners, I think we need to be aware of that and sensitive to that. The latest target of being woke or accused of being woke is Chick-fil-A, which will make many of you shake your head, because Chick-fil-A is a traditionally conservative organization that aligns themselves with the religious right. And even they are coming under fire for being woke, simply because they released a statement several months ago about their commitment to ensuring mutual respect, understanding, and dignity, and diversity in their organization. And they made the fatal flaw of hiring somebody and giving them the title VP of DE&I. Other companies that have been accused of being woke include Disney, Walmart, AT&T, CVS, Verizon, Raytheon. I can go on and on. And in the United States is the only place in the world where DE&I has become politicized. And it's a pity. And I ask you, what do you stand for? And what do your organization stand for? Because the only way we are going to battle this is to remove indifference, right? Is to not be indifferent, but to take a stand. So I invite you to do that. I'm going to turn it over to Joseph for the last couple of slides, and looking forward to hearing your questions. So if you have any, write them in the Q&A box and we'll address them.
Yeah, I have a couple for you. Let's do this quickly. I think I mentioned earlier that HC Moneyball offers a report which makes it very easy for you to get the benefits of an analytics platform without having to run it. The DE&I audit report, for example, has over 70 analytics performed. There are visuals of dashboards so that you can see the implications. And I'm not going to read all this to you, and you'll also have it in the video and the slides. But one of the most important things our clients tell us to them is the ability to benchmark and see what else is going on, comparing you to what else is going on in DE&I and in your industry. Whoa, couldn't get that word out. So that's of great value. Once again, just let us know. The next slide, I think, Solange, shows how to get in touch with us. Let us know if you're interested. There's an easy way to book a 15-minute call with one of us. There's my email address and Solange's LinkedIn address. Feel free to reach out to any of us. Tell us you're interested. Tell us what your questions are, and we'll be glad to answer them. Let me jump to the questions. Solange, one question here from Eric says, bias audit, what are the penalties?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that question. Right now, there are no economic penalties, right? There are no penalties enforced or are assessed or levied on organizations for bias, but there are social impact penalties. You don't want to be known as an organization that has bias in the way that they either hire, manage, or communicate, value to employees. And again, there's a lot of benefit in diversity. So we can see bias in lots of different ways in the organization. And I actually talk about this in the first webinar that we did in January. You want to make sure that you don't have either any hidden biases or maybe not so hidden biases. You can measure that in terms of the way that you hire people, right? So are your candidate slates diverse? And are your final offers extended to candidates representative? We can see bias in pay. We can see bias in the way that you deliver training and development. So are you favoring a certain race or gender when you select people for training, or for mobility, lateral moves, or advancement, promotions? And again, I think I said this before in pay, pay practices. So one of the big topics that's being discussed very broadly across all ISO HR standards is pay equity. And in Europe, pay discrimination, either based on gender, race, or ethnicity, is considered to be a human rights issue. So it's not just, yeah, I've got some biases in the way that I pay people, but it is a violation of human rights. So when we talk about biases, you want to actually ensure that you are not having any hidden biases in your organization. If that answers your question.
Solange, we're I see the number of questions all at once here. Real quickly, you mentioned certification, and you also mentioned a number of different organizations. What do I need to know about certification?
So if you want to get certified by the International Standards Organization, the ISO, right now in the United States, there is one organization that is certifying companies for two different standards. It's called HRSI. Some of you may have heard of HRCI, the Human Resources Certification Institute. HRSI is their sister organization, and they are the secretariat for ANSI, ANSI in the United States, which is the US representative of ISO that is based in Europe, in Switzerland. So the two standards that they will certify an organization is the 3415 standard, which is the diversity and inclusion standard, and the 3414 standard, which is the human capital governance and disclosure standard. Being certified is not a requirement, but it certainly helps to establish credibility with your stakeholders in terms of your commitment to these two topic areas, diversity and inclusion, and human capital governance and transparency.
There's a question here, Solange, from someone named Diala, who was a student of yours, it says 8 years ago.
Hi.
The question is, do you recommend any reliable tools or sources organizations can use to understand location demographics, especially when entering a new market?
So I'm going to give you two answers. One is come to us and we will help you understand what you need to do, what you need to think about. We will help you understand your competitiveness against companies in your industry sector, and we will give you information about the local labor force so that you can best target, create goals as you're entering that new market in terms of your employee demographics. We just did this project with a Northeast region bank that is wanting to expand to the Southeast and the Southwest. And we help them understand what the local labor supply is based on age, race, gender, ethnicity, and education status. So we can get that granular to try to help you understand what the labor supply is for, let's say, people in the accounting function, right? We can tell you what the labor supply is for those professions, right? And we're using BLS data. We just know how to use it really well. So the first answer is come to us and we'll help you. The second answer is if you don't want to come to us, there is public domain resources that you can use. You have to learn how to curate that data and analyze that data, but it is available to you. We use a combination of public domain and private access data when we work with clients. So, we might be able to do a little bit of a better job for you than if you did it on your own. And Diala, it's nice to see you and thank you for following and showing up.
We said to everyone we would try and end this quickly. I have one last question, unless people ask more while we're talking. You spoke about standards, and you mentioned many different standards organizations. How do I know what standards apply to me?
That is a fantastic question. And it all depends on which governance monitoring agencies' requirements or framework you are following. So I showed, and I'm going to go back to that slide. So you can see that I gave you information about IFRS, ISO, GRI, the World Economic Forum, ISS, and the UN SDGs. If your organization is already following one of these governance monitoring frameworks, then that framework will tell you what you need to do to be in compliance. So you can see, the ISO has a lot of both quantitative and quantitative information. You can see that each one of these frameworks has a different set of requirements in terms of what they want to see in terms of human capital performance. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention is we're just showing the top measures. There is more to this list. This list is not exhaustive. There are probably another 10 or 15 more reporting categories for each one of these monitoring agencies. We're just giving you the more prevalent. So you figuring out which framework or standard you're following will tell you what you need to produce in terms of human capital information. Hopefully that answered the question.
There's a question here from, I hope I pronounced this right, 𝗵𝗶𝗀, who says, what are your views on pay discrimination scenario in India?
I was hoping that you wouldn't ask me that question in this public forum because I don't have any current information about what's going on in India. And I'm sorry to admit my ignorance in this area. I have been to your beautiful country twice and, really admire what's going on in terms of economic development there. I consulted to companies there and I know that there's some controversy now in terms of the political leadership, but I can't address pay discrimination in India because I simply don't have any knowledge, any current knowledge about that topic, and I apologize.
That's very honest and very consistent with who you are. Here's one that says, I've seen DE, this is from Julia. I've seen DEI and B, where B stands for belonging. Is DE&I the standard terminology supported by ISO?
Yes. And there are lots of acronyms, right, for DE&I. Some people talk about the B, right? Some people put J in the beginning for justice. So I think that it's defined in lots of different ways, but the long and the short of it is diversity is very easy to measure. It's external. I can see it with my eyes. Equity, we can measure, as I said, looking for biases where you can eliminate any bias is a way of generating some level of equity as an experience for employees. And then the I or the B, which is a personal experience, cannot be observed and cannot be calculated. It has to be collected as a lived experience. And that's kind of hard for organizations to commit to doing employee engagement surveys or employee belonging surveys. So I think that's the weakest link. But I always say, if there is a behavior that's occurring in the organization or an experience, it eventually manifests in something that's measurable, like attrition, or like burnout, or like lower levels of productivity. So we might not be able to measure it directly, but we can see the effect of that inclusion or belonging as a manifestation of behavior.
Here's one from Megan. Hi, Megan. Can you talk about how to counter the tendency to want to be opaque in order to manage risk, in particular with regard to pay equity and opportunity and advancement?
Yeah, and I think this is the natural tension between wanting to be transparent and also wanting to mitigate risk. If the lawyers ran the world, there would be no disclosure at all. We know that. But that's not the way the world works these days. And, the transparency is what stakeholders want. So we have to find a way to balance disclosure and risk mitigation. And I always say, this is still my position, that there is no such thing as bad news when you employ data analytics to understand the trends of your human capital management performance. Yes, you may find that you have a gender pay or an ethnicity pay gap. Finding out and then addressing it responsibly is good news, right? And the research from the Conference Board shows that employees and customers actually trust organizations more than they trust the government. So as an organization, we have an obligation and an opportunity to communicate effectively to our stakeholders. And if you find that you've got a problem, it's better to address it and to come up with a strategy to mitigate that risk than to sweep it under the carpet and hope for it to go away, because it won't go away and the risk only becomes greater the longer the problem persists.
Okay, we have, let's see, I think there's one more here if I haven't missed any. What are some, this is from Rhea, or Rhea, I guess. What are some DEI events you would recommend organizations may host related to the themes for June, July, or Pride Month and Indigenous Peoples Day?
That's a great question. My first instinct was to say, if you have an ERG in your organization that represents gay, LGBTQ plus employees or Indigenous people, you should ask your ERG how they would like to be recognized and acknowledged, and let that group express themselves in terms of what's appropriate and what's requested by them. I know that there are a lot of organizations that are, flying the gay flag, that they're having events for LGBTQ plus. And I think it's an organization by organization, initiative. But again, I would say be informed by that employee population group. Instead of trying to figure out what you think you should do, let them tell you what they would like to see happen in the organization and let their voices be heard. Hopefully that's a satisfying answer for you.
Here's one more question. I think we probably need to start wrapping up because we're up close to an hour.
Yeah.
This is from another one of your previous students, from Deidre. Just in case anybody doesn't know, those of us that work with Solange don't know if she sleeps or when she sleeps. She teaches at 4 different universities in addition to everything else she does. This says, thanks for the information session. Can you offer brief remarks on the future of DEI? I'm noticing a number of U.S. organizations divesting, defunding DE&I. Is this field here to stay?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I am not a futurist. I wish I were. I wish Stella was here because she would probably have a good answer.
Tell them who Stella is.
Stella is my co-author on Humanizing Human Capital, and she really is a futurist. She's an HR futurist. The organizations that are divesting or defunding DE&I, I think, are responding to the conservative woke movement. And as I said, this is the only country in the world where DE&I is politicized. I wouldn't bet on DE&I going away for a couple of reasons. One is that the rest of the world cares about this. Number one. Number two, it is considered to be a human rights issue, not just an employment issue. And number three, there is a sea of academic research that is proving that diversity generates economic benefit for organizations. And since for-profit companies are in the business of making money, right? They weren't in the business of making money, they would go out of business. So even though we have something called stakeholder capitalism, we are still focused on the shareholder and the obligation of the organization to generate profits. And we have proven that there is a relationship between DE&I and sustainable corporate profits. I don't think it's going to go away so quickly. And I think what you're seeing is really the politicization of this topic, which I don't think is going to be long-lived. I think that, there are things that are going on in Washington where they're trying to get bills passed that don't let companies make investments based on ESG. Those bills are not going to pass. We're still going to care about the environment. We're going to care about people. I don't think it's going away, and I hope I'm not wrong.
Great note to end on. We promised everybody no more than an hour. Those were great questions. Solange, can you put up the contact us slide? You'll all get access to the slides and to the video of this session. If you want to contact us immediately, make a quick note of these because it'll take us a couple of days to turn around the video and the slides. Thank you all. Keep your eyes open for a notice about number 5, the last one in the series, which is about stakeholders. And we look forward to seeing you then. To those of you who've been to a number of these events, thank you for coming back. To anybody who's new, as Solange said earlier, if you want access to the earlier presentations, just